Hi, folks. We're going to go ahead and get started as folks are trickling in. I've got the easiest job this week in introducing somebody who truly does not need to be introduced to this group, Joe Lambert, who I'm sure all of you know, and we wouldn't be here, I believe, without Joe. So I'm just going to turn it over to him. And
great introduction.
Like,
fantastic.
Does that work?
Really enjoyed that. Really. I asked him to do a very short introduction. I think, let's give him a hand for that's the shortest introduction anybody's ever given. On the off chance you don't know that Joe Lambert is the founder and executive director of Story Center, that is true. I am the founder and executive director of Story Center. I'm going to start by asking everybody in the room who has been an alumni of a Story Center workshop or a Story Center webinar, or had Story Center come to your campus, stand up. So look around the room. This is what 30 years of work looks like. It looks like touching on the lives of lots of people, one story at a time. Today we're going to talk a little bit about that history, contextualize it. I've got a couple of guests I'm going to bring on stage, and we're actually going to let you guys tell your own story about digital storytelling. We're going to somehow fit that into 50 minutes. I don't know how. I know you're going to tell me when I've run out of time, but I'm officially starting my timer at 50 minutes because we got to get you to a beer after this. And I learned a long time, do not stand between some people and their beer, you know? Exactly. I put this up because all of those that know how to use their phones and point at a QR code can have these slides, which means you can look at them at your phone, or they may come in useful later. You know, you can sell them on eBay, not for very much. But I'll wait for you a second, try to get it on there and click the button. You guys are so good. You're so modern. Look at all those cameras. That's fantastic. I will start by saying the history of Story Center obviously did not start with Story Center. We stand on the shoulders of giants, people who did the work, really beginning with the popular front movement of the 1930s, when the idea of ordinary people's stories, proletarian literature, the narratives of those outside the dominant culture were being projected by documentarians, by writers, by people on the radio. You know, many of us look, and this is our country, right? But in countries all over the world, similar processes were happening to validate the lives of people. So when we say the history of digital storytelling, we start looking backward to those bridges, you know, to that period of the New Deal, the bridges back to the 60s when a lot of community arts work originated, and to the, you know, periods that led to the initiation of this work. I wanted immediately to call into the room the late departed member of our staff. The Story Center has about 12 people that works with us. So far, nobody's ever left who took the job. One person passed away during the job, and she was the woman who, you know, represented a sister to me who had been involved in movement politics, in Chicano theater here in Washington, D.C., and had, you know, a deep and profound sense of compassionate listening. She was the one who taught me how to listen radically. So we call her into a room in her spirit, because I met her the first time around the corner at the AFI Silver Docks Center where I was giving a talk. And when we lost her back in 2019, you know, it broke our hearts, but she would have definitely been a core member of this organizing group. And, Bill Shoebridge and a number of the people here in D.C., Bev, knew her quite well. So we call her in the room thinking about all of the different movements that led us here. And they're reminding us that we really started in the nexus of several things that were going on in the late 80s and early 90s. How many people have seen the story Tanya in the room? So I'm not going to show it today for those who haven't seen it. That's one of the reasons that I sent you the link. I had to cut some corners here to get through all this. But our work started at the American Film Institute in Los Angeles in a workshop led by my friend and business partner, Dana Atchley. And this story, which was about a friend of hers who was in hospice care, who had been an activist in LA around the issue of what happens to the children of women and men, parents, who are taken out by the AIDS epidemic. And as the story goes, we showed the movie the afternoon that Tanya died, 2 days after our workshop. And it became a kind of founding myth of Story Center in that it held within it, in this period right after the LA riots, in this period where the impact of AIDS and HIV on all communities, but particularly on poor people's communities, was more evident. And that we were also at this kind of funny point where the dot-com tsunami, all the digital tsunami was kind of washing over California. And we found ourselves with a story that captured the essence of why we do what we do. It was a story about how you make a friend. It was a story about the way you bridge the gulf between cultures in a city like LA, where white people and black people weren't talking to each other. They were angry people. And this was a kind of healing gesture of this one woman to help this woman, in her final days, pass on and then, take care of her children. I'd like to say that both of Tanya Shaw's children remain Facebook friends. And in the funny world we live in, I tried to get Tanya here today to be part of this. I didn't quite succeed. Our work went to a lot of places. The other piece I was going to show today that I'm going to skip, that I had this brother, he's on an airplane between Dallas and Cupertino, as he said, at San Jose, because this was somebody who was part of a workshop we did with the Llano Grande Youth Center related to a program called Managing Information in Rural America that the Kellogg Foundation paid. And it was a story about his grandparents and the piece of land they had in South Texas, in the colonia called Ed Couch. And he was a teacher who had gone to Brown University and come back to Ed Couch, Elsa, Texas, and he told the story. About 6 months ago, he called me and said, "Joe, what's up?" And he said, "Hey, I haven't heard your voice in a long time. What's up with you?" And he said, "Well, I just got a job with Apple Computer. I'm now a regional sales manager for Apple." And he said, "I used that story to get this job." And so, the reason he's going to Cupertino, he's going to that big ring in the South Bay. But again, if you watch the story and you watch what he says afterwards, that gives you a really profoundly good sense of the way our work has touched people and the changes that have gone on with this work. What we're really proud of is all of the people that we've trained that went on to do the work that they do for their own communities in their own ways. And in region after region, parts of the world, and all of you, frankly, when we see these amazing presentations that we've seen the last 2 days of people doing just profoundly cool work, we don't take any responsibility for that because you are all founders of something. What we're particularly proud of is the work that we've done in connection with Native American communities, First Nation communities in Canada, and other indigenous communities around the world. I'm going to show one movie, and we've shown this movie because we had this staff member that said he was working on the book on the side. And little we know, he wrote maybe the most popular book of that year called They're There. But this is a story he made that kind of captures the essence of this. And I can see my good friend Barbara's arrived. So Barbara, we're going to show this movie. Hi, Barbara. I know you're there. We're going to show this movie, and then we're going to ask you some questions about the work that you've done and that you know others have done in this particular community.
These are some of the first films ever recorded. Thomas Edison chose these. These he thought we should see, what should be captured in motion. There's a beautiful kind of noise to them. Something old, something lost. What you're seeing here is the ghost dance. But they're not dancing it. Not really. This was 4 years after the Wounded Knee Massacre, which happened as a result of the ghost dance. The dancers here are performing as actors in a practiced ghost dance act, having joined Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. They're performing their Indianness. We keep wanting to see it that way. Indians dressed as Indians, the way we want them to be Indians. Head-dressed, historical, long gone. They don't want to see us here. Now. They want to look away. Look forward, but it all just keeps looking like the past again, backward. I don't know how to be anymore. I know that it matters to look, to see. These coming years might come like a cancer. I wonder what and all that we've captured. I wonder who and what will make it through. What will disappear? And what will we decide to keep?
Barbara, can we get you up on our little screen here? Hello, Barbara Aragon. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Calling in from Sacramento, California.
It's great to have you here. When I asked you to come here, I gave you two questions. One is, how has digital storytelling been used within the communities that you've collaborated with? And the second is, why do you think this particular form of communication has been adopted by so many Native American communities?
Well, you changed those questions a little bit, Joe.
That I don't doubt.
Okay. Well, I became involved in digital storytelling by attending a prevention conference. I'm a social worker by training. And I was at a conference that's actually here held in Sacramento, and it was on Silence Speaks, and it was really a powerful experience for me to sit in there and see my first digital stories. And the reason is I felt instantly this needs to be done in Indigenous communities, in Native American communities. And I just got an excitement about it because in our very DNA, we are storytellers, you know? And so when I'm listening to these stories, which were healing stories, hero stories by the survivors of domestic violence, I just thought of all of the trauma that has occurred in Native communities, and the stories needed to be told. And because stories really are the rebar of Indigenous communities, you know, they carry the values, they carry the history, they explain how things came to be. And so in that way, they're very trauma informed, though we didn't use that term back in the day. And so, so for me, I knew instantly, you know, I wanted to bring digital storytelling, and started out with working with veterans because I have a heart for veterans. I come from a veteran family and been raised a veteran. And so I knew that those stories were not being told by the veterans. And so, but yes, very, very early, that I knew, you know, we had to use story, and so many of the ways we told story were no longer being used. And I just felt that digital storytelling with the pictures, with the voiceovers, with the soundtrack was going to bring a new type of life and spirit to storytelling back in our communities.
Have there been some good examples as you've seen this, you know, spread out to different communities, different, you know, tribal groups? Good examples of where it was particularly effective as a form of advocacy or organizing around public health or other issues?
Yeah, definitely. There was a movement here in California because as I began to do digital storytelling, there was a number of other people that came to the Story Center. At that time, it was called the Center for Digital Storytelling, and also had a same realization. And so we began to see a lot of, say, the clinics, because there's probably about 30 some clinics in California, Native American clinics, who just jumped on that. We need to tell our stories. These are prevention stories. And I think a lot of, and you kind of alluded it to before, was that outside of Native communities, other people, researchers, non-natives, PhD students had been telling our stories. And in that way, they became, I would say, you know, the author and authority, you know, they have the same root. And so if you author a story, you are seen as the authority. And the stories had really been told from outside of our communities. So once we embraced our stories about our history, our trauma, you know, those just social determinants of health, that it was a way to really reclaim our stories and to see our faces and hear our voices. And I think it's been a powerful, I guess, tool and medium for healing in our communities.
You know, you were already a teacher of story and storytelling. That was part of the method you used. And as you said, it's the rebar of your communities. How is doing digital storytelling, meaning being a facilitator, how has it changed you as a person, as somebody that works, you know, in very intimate and powerful ways with groups of individuals?
Oh, wow. You know, I often say that digital storytelling is my spiritual practice. You know, it's become my spiritual practice. And because there is no place in my mind, and I know I'm not even close to the number of digital stories that you have facilitated, but I've done quite a few in different Indigenous communities. And a number of them with veterans, but a lot with youth, a lot of people recovering in the mental health field, people that have been survivors of suicide. And there is nothing that has, again, and coming back to the spiritual practice, where I can see, whether you call the higher power, you know, consciousness of the universe, whatever it might be, where I see people's lives being changed. I'm honored to witness those. And so to bring people into Story Circle and have them come and them often say, oh, I don't have a story. I don't know what I'm going to talk about. I have nothing to talk about. I've never done anything. But to really begin to be a facilitator and start harvesting in their story just by asking questions and seeing everyone else's story prime the next person's story, to me, it's a very spiritual experience. And I feel like I've just been really honored. And during COVID, I began to, just because we were isolated, is that I began to collaborate across the miles with artists, and I would tell traditional stories. And that was my salvation during that time when we're alone, when we're isolated. And I could dive into not only creating those stories with artists, but also that I could become the whirlwind woman in the story, or the cocoon woman that was walking around the world in Greece. And not only could I tell them and become them, but I could share them on social media and put processing questions together and say, use this with your family. I'd put them on Facebook and I'd say, hey, feel free to share these traditional stories. So for me, like I said, it's become something that it's become my rainbow, I guess.
Well, I thank you for giving us a little bit of your time this afternoon. I know you're busy with projects with Tribal Tech and many other organizations, but this group of digital storytelling practitioners, I'm going to show them to you here because I can turn this camera around.
Yes, I want to
Here, everybody wave at Barbara. You see them all out there?
Yeah.
Big group. Anyway, I wanted them to know of your work and to know of you. And I really thank you for your contributions to this field. It's been enormous. And I'm always meeting, I'm living in New Mexico now, so I'm meeting people from Native communities who are telling me about, oh, I know Barbara. Oh, I know Barbara. And it's an amazing thing, a gift that you've given us all. So thank you, Barbara. I'll let you go as we move on with our program today. And we'll see you. Yep. Thank you. People ask, what is Story Center? Some of you don't know much about the actual organization. These are the people that work for Story Center, at least the ones we put on our website. We have about 12 staff people. We have, on average every year, and several of you were in the room, contractors that work with us provisionally. The gig comes up and we have you help us teach. The gig comes up, you have us help, manage it in some way. Leads to about 70 to 90 separate gigs that the program people pretty much manage autonomously. And we've got staff over in Europe and England and Portugal. We have Rani down here who runs Story Center Canada. We have people in Denver. We have me in New Mexico. And the bulk of our staff and our organization is based in the Bay Area, California. But this is what kind of keeps us going, is the custom processes which we get to collaborate with people. A number of you are also running digital storytelling kinds of operations, and that's usually what keeps you going, is you get a partnership over some time. I remember the partnership very dearly with Bill and the gang at UMBC. We came and did several workshops, and really a lot of this work in the region, took off from there under their leadership. You might also know us from the workshops we offer publicly. It's about 90% online now, but you can learn about those. And then we also do a lot of initiatives that are driven by us. I mean, we're a nonprofit, and we like to go find things we really want to do, in our own way. Things like Silence Speaks, which Barbara mentioned, grew out of the efforts of Amy Hill's, historic work in domestic violence prevention, grown into a whole bunch of work in international development, international context. But we'd hope you'd learn, more about Story Center at some time. I called them into the room because there are 4 or 5 or 6 people that are here to help me with this next process. We asked some of our staff to write into the prompt you were given. And so we'll listen for a minute to the voices of some of our staff reading from this prompt.
Was a time when I didn't see my people reflected properly on a screen. We're still fighting.
There was a time when I realized I had been telling other people's stories for far too long. That's when I found digital storytelling. What I loved about
this work was being able to offer myself at first and then others a place, a space, a mirror sometimes, and such others, where they could better
might unlock their own stories. What I've learned is
I have to
to
remind
listen to
myself
what is not being said.
that these spaces
and
are
to
not
trust
just
that
for
everyone
me.
holds their truths close to their
They are
hearts.
for those brave and courageous enough to share their voice.
to say what I saw, but instead ask questions or say nothing at all to allow them to say it themselves sometimes. What I've learned is that that's where the real power is, in agency.
Now it's your turn. In the next 5 minutes, you're going to write this. And in 5 minutes, we're going to come to some of you with our staff here and have you read it to us. And one of the staff will take a picture of your hand. And what we want you to find is on your lifeline, that crease below your palm is supposed to represent birth to death, birth to death. So someplace in there is the point in which you found digital storytelling. So we just want you to hold your hand up and we'll take that picture. But we're going to give you 5 minutes, and we're only going to be able to share 2 or 3 of these, but we want everybody to write into this. And I'll look at my clock, and in 4 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll start sharing. I can see that some people are ready to share. So the rest of you can start writing, but let me get the first volunteer who would like to read and have their hand picture taken for this process. Is there anybody crazy enough to go first? Back in the back there, we got a winner. Let's get a microphone and a thing. The microphone's coming to you. Picture first. Hold your hand up. Doesn't have to be perfect. Just get it done. I'll go ahead and hand him the mic and he can start reading. Introduce yourself, by the way.
Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Hernandez from Los Angeles. I'm a high school journalism, film production, and photography teacher. There was a time when I was lost, and seemingly so was the world. That's when I found digital storytelling. What I loved about this work was the freedom it gave me to think and dream and act beyond boundaries. What challenged me was technical limitations and cost, but also learning a new grammar. What I've learned is there is no separation between I and we, or art and politics.
Bam. Thank you very much. Okay, let's get a second volunteer. Come on, somebody, hand up in the air. Hand up in the air. Oh, there they are. Okay, we got our dear friend Janet. Here she goes. Get the picture. You can see we rehearsed this for at least 2 minutes.
Okay. There was a time when things felt very out of control. I was shuttling between my ancestral home, a dying mother, and a migrant's promised land. That's when I found digital storytelling. I could set down my colliding stories, side by side, layered, even topsy-turvy. What I loved about this work was that it offered me the opportunity to explore. What challenged me was mastering the technology, choosing the images, more show, less tell. What I've learned is slow down, be patient, take your time, listen deeply to yourself and to others. This is a new kind of poetry, a poetry that comes from the soul.
Boom. We'll take one more. We got one more person. Anybody want to? Right here. Okay. Gonna be down front. Here we go. We know the process now.
Hello, I'm Sydney. There was a time when I entered university as a clueless freshman. That's when I found digital storytelling. What I loved about this work was I got to freely express myself creatively. What challenged me was being open and vulnerable. And what I've learned is that stories matter and they build bridges.
Beautifully done. So I'm going to ask my dear friend Karen Workman to join me up, and we're going to talk just a little bit about the future. Karen Workman is the founder and director of the Museu da Pessoa in Sao Paulo, Brazil. If you didn't get to see her present today, as I often describe her, she's a sister from another mother. In some ways, every time we talk, we're like, well, that's funny. I was just thinking that too. And it's just, we've done the same thing. But I'll start, Karen, just describe the Museu da Pessoa. You don't have to give it the whole history, but what it does now.
Okay, it's such a pleasure to be here with you, Joe. So Museu da Pessoa, and I'm really emotional because this is the 30th anniversary of Story Center, and before I left Brazil, we had just had our commemoration of 30th anniversary too, so we're still brothers and sisters. So Museu da Pessoa, it's a digital museum of life stories. It's an open museum, it's a multiple platform, and it's open to every person to tell and to register his, her life story in the internet, outside internet. So now Museu da Pessoa has more than 20,000 stories in its archives and have multiple, like Story Center, multiples educational uses, community work, artwork, exhibitions online, and a whole bunch of, we are a museum. So at each story is a piece of this museum. So it's briefly that.
You know, in some ways, you guys are more in the, oral history end of the kind of the work that we do, but we're all in the process of memory and connection to memory. When we talked the other day, we talked about we know what we've done. We kind of know what we're doing, right? But this work in memory has a particular role in society. And particularly, as we've heard several of the presentations, in sort of getting us past some of the legacies, whether the colonial legacy or the legacy of capitalism as we've had to deal with it. Where do you think this work is going, given what you see, what you know, and what we've learned over this 30 years?
I do. We arranged it.
Yeah, we talked about it.
I
changed everything. She said, you should say what you're going to think, and then I'll think, okay, I'll back up. I'll say, in my mind, the work that we do now has more relevance than ever, and it's going to become a more central part of a kind of restoration process that we can see in the kind of things we need to do to deal with the environment, in the kinds of things we need to do to overcome racism, sexism, homophobia, the many, many different ways that we marginalize people. That story work is the bridge that will get us past these legacies. I don't think it'll be in this generation or the generation after. As many Native people say, it's a 7-generational project. And I just think we're beginning to learn and beginning to disseminate the ways that that's going to work for people. What about you? What do you think?
So I think, though we talk a lot about memory, and I come from a historian background, so I've always thought a lot about memory and history, and so I think we are doing always political work, because our work is not just changing people, it's changing the way historical narratives are built. So we are talking about creating futures. And I agree with you, because this is going to become more and more essential. But to add up something, I would say that like you, we started as a digital museum even before internet. So you're always thinking and being active on how digital, when it came, would democratize history, would democratize, that would enable everyone to speak. But what happened is more or less a strange thing, was a lot of fragmentation. A lot of, prejudices became worse. We organized ourselves in small tribes. So then there was a crisis. But I agree, because now I think our work is more and more and more necessary, because it's like being the counterpart of this big trend in the world that is transforming ourselves in self-objects of consuming our own lives. So what we do is promoting connection and conscience, is using our stories and learning how to listen. And I agree, this is the future. Either we learn how to listen, either we are going to become mute, because we will not have anything to say to each other.
My favorite book, maybe of the last 2 years, was Kim Stanley Robinson's Ministry of the Future, which was a kind of roadmap. It was both a polemic and a speculative fiction novel, a roadmap for how resistance will happen, particularly around climate change. But it was a lot about very small communities figuring things out. You introduced me, and I'll move this to the next slide, to this author from your country, and I'd like you to say something about their work.
Okay. So I was telling Joe yesterday, the day before, about Krenak. Krenak is an indigenous leadership. He created, some years ago, the Union of the People of Forests. And now he became a very famous person in Brazil. He's a philosopher and writer, and a very good friend, too. So Krenak wrote 3, and 2 of them are in English, and beautiful books that's called Ideas to Postpone the End of the World. Mm-hmm. And they are there. But I was telling to Joe about this, because his last book that's not still in English, it's called The Future is Ancestral. And the book starts from a small story that are these youth guys, indigenous guy, going up the river, and they are saying, it's almost there, we are getting almost there. And then when they arrive, they say, yes, we got exactly to the place our ancestors told us how it was. So they are going to the future, they are going to the ancestry. And I think this is beautiful, because ancestrality is not about going back. Ancestrality is learning how to reconnect. And I think our work is about this possibility of being linked to our inner self, and also not just as Krenak's saying, Krenak's always saying, why we think human beings are the only ones in this planet, so to connecting and listening to us, and to the other beings like mountains and trees and the universe.
In Barbara Kingsolver's Demon Copperhead, she talks about the distinction between people of the land and people of the dollar, people of money. And that in some ways the divides and the memory schism is, most of us come from a place where the place where we're from is where we're from. We are grounded in a particular locale, and as many of us got ripped away from those ancestral homelands, those places of knowing that were deep and long, and that we sort of forget how to be in the world, not just, to farm and to fish and to hunt or something, but also just to be comfortable with ourselves in place. In Brazil, the struggle in the Amazon has been so extraordinary, and I know you've been doing a lot of work in that context, and in some ways you're bringing an Amazonian philosopher to us. But why is that struggle particularly important? The issue of the land, and the issue of not dislocating millions of more people, but finding ways to live, coexist with whatever extractive processes or economic processes that are going on in Brazil.
Yeah. Brazil, like here, United States or Canada or every place like that, the dispute in the beginning, I think still today very strongly in Brazil is about land, is dispute of land. But there is another dispute, it's about history, it's about symbolic, it's about erasing all this knowledge from the traditions. So we don't go to schools, we are wasting all of that, really, as a society. So what I think, and we use it in our work to say, I'm going to help. This work is going to help this community. This work is going to help patients. This work is going to help indigenous community. But when we started really deeply, I thought, we need help. So when we do this kind of work, it's like helping this society we are in to bring in some of this knowledge. And I tell you, I've been in some of these communities, and you get there, and it's really, sometimes in the forest, there is maybe lots of things. But once you do the story circle, it gets like, boom, so easily connection, because even though they are young people or old people, the connection is still there. It's much more, less walls. So I think our work is in this kind of thing in Amazonia is learning more than teaching.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Yesterday, when I was in the Pompleton community with Curtis and the folks that were working from UMBC in that community, I did really feel that dynamic of educators who have been sort of colonizing and through their research and other things, communities were being inverted, and suddenly the communities were beginning to colonize some of the academics in ways that the academics were backing way the heck up to listen a little more deeply and a little more profoundly. Somebody asked today, what does radical listening mean? And to me, what it has to mean is decentering the historic authorities by, in a way, calmly and relaxedly waiting your turn to speak in all these contexts that, me as a white guy, I feel privileged to be the first to say something. I know, in your work, we imagine 30 years forward that the composition of the communities that are leading the charge around memory work is going to be very different than the ones that you and I represent. And we see it in this room, that the young people coming out of Montgomery College, the young people coming out of UMBC, the young people coming out of these neighborhoods, they're going to change this work in ways that it's not even our story. It's sort of our grandchildren's story that will be played out. Is there a hope you would have from what you know as an elder that you would want them to hold on to? Is there a single part of this that you would feel is a value that you want them to focus on it if you could help them, so to speak?
So yeah, yes. Over these last 30 years, I learned something that both of our institutions play with technology a lot. Now I remember in '96 when I saw internet, I thought, oh, this is what I was talking about. So we learned that. But then it passed, and then it passed, and then it changed, and then it keeps changing. So our work is not about how to use technology. This is tool. So what's all our work all about? What are we talking about? I think we are talking about politics, but not macro. Of course, macro, but how you connect a person. Not, in Portuguese, we have two words, pessoa and person. Pessoa is not what you represent. We're not talking about identity. I think we are going bypass that. We are going to understand that our experience in life is so valued that if we understand this is then our legacy, each person in the world, we are going to suffer not to lose a pyramid, but to lose a person. So this is my dream. I don't know if this is going to happen, but I think this is what is going to change the way we deal with Earth and with ourselves. It's understanding that experience and each one's experience, even the trees one, is the way we're going to learn how to listen. So I think the answer is, if they learn deeply how to listen, I think we're done.
Stop on that. Thank you, Karen Workman. Thank you. I've got to do 2 announcements and then we got to shut this down. So thank Karen Workman for joining me. You're welcome, sweetie. I always wanted to be a TV show host, and that was my one opportunity. That was just really exciting for me. You can tell I dressed up for it, you know. 2 things. The generosity of a WeVideo company to this conference came in the form of offering us 300 accounts that we can distribute. And the decision was we will distribute those to any project that's proposed to us, up to 30 accounts anytime in the year from August 1st of this upcoming month to July 31. So let's thank WeVideo for doing that. The idea is, you know, if you have a classroom and there's no budget for WeVideo, contact us. If you have a project in your community, you want to do this work, contact us. You know, Michelle Dallenberg is working with student loan survivors. We could extend licenses to the groups of people that are doing that. The hope is that it leads to some projects getting done that wouldn't have gotten done otherwise, but we're not going to hold it against anybody. All you're going to need to do is email me in the next month, and you can pass this on to friends and community, and we'll distribute those licenses, you know, more or less on a first come, first served basis. And if you only need 6, ask for 6. You know, if you need 30, ask for 30. And to make you very happy, I will say we are done now, and thank you guys for listening to us today.